In the name of Christ, amen. The 20th century American theologian and Christian ethicist H. Richard Niebuhr once wrote, and I quote, "As a rule, people are polytheists, referring now to this and now to that valued being as the source of life's meaning. Sometimes they live for Jesus as God, sometimes for country, and sometimes for Yale." Niebuhr had graduated from Yale and taught there for 30-some years. "For the most part, they make gods out of themselves or out of the work of their own hands, living for their own glory as persons and as communities." For Niebuhr, which of one's gods is dependable and which are idols must be determined through one's inner spiritual life. He believed that to be a self, in the fullest sense of that word, means to have a primary center of value, beyond our own self-interest, against which our impulses, thoughts, and actions are measured and will hopefully reflect. For Christians, this center of value is the meaning and teachings of Christ in the world, grounded in the love and compassion of God and the spiritual impulse to bring about goodness in the world. As selves, our role is to be agents or stewards of this center of value as we interact in the world. Other religious traditions manifest this center of value in different ways, but all find common ground in acting out of a place beyond one's own self-interest, a place that seeks the betterment of others and ultimately some form of peace, shalom, salam. This morning, we heard the prophet Jeremiah, who remained faithful to God, lamenting how his people had compromised their center of value, their covenantal relationship with God, by reverting to paganism as a means of maintaining peace under threats of invasion, which, as a tactic, would fail. And Jesus, in our gospel and the passage that follows, points out how, when our own self-interest becomes our center of value, we can easily lose sight of our spiritual center. In this case, it's not wealth, but it's our obsession with it, like an addiction that leads to compromising our center of value. Rather, we are called to be agents or stewards of something greater than ourselves, and to put whatever we have or create to use for a greater good than merely our own self-preservation or glory. When we are living from our spiritual center, we become stewards of one another and of creation. Drawing on the African tradition of Ubuntu, we also are stewards of future generations and accountable to past generations, and ultimately to the generative spiritual force that transcends temporal life, which we call God. How our stewardship is lived out is first a recognition of our common ground, our common bond across our differences. The Anglican Communion, which we are a part of, is held together by the common ground of our tradition, despite many differences of culture and belief, in what former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, often and fondly called our bonds of mutual affection. Those bonds of affection have been sorely tested over the issue of human sexuality. Most recently, at the 2022 Lambeth Conference, where the bishops were expected to vote on a statement or call on human dignity, and where a controversial change had been slipped in at the last moment. The change would force a highly politicized vote that bishops on both sides of the issue felt might satisfy self-interests of one faction or another, but could break apart the communion, destroying so much more good that could be achieved by remaining even in a fragile relationship with one another. When the leaders that morning decided that there would be no vote, the relief and joy on both sides was heartfelt. An African bishop spoke for several colleagues, saying that while they still held to traditional teachings on sexuality and marriage, there were more important issues where they could walk together, such as climate change. Something clearly had shifted in the hearts of many who were present. Second, how stewardship of one another is lived out is through mutual mission, which is a shift from the traditional donor-recipient relationship that has characterized colonialism and much philanthropy. Mutual mission means that we all have something of value to offer one another, and in turn, we must recognize what they have of value to offer us. Some years ago, a wealthy group from one of our dioceses visited a poor rural African diocese that had limited electricity and few paved roads. The visitors saw so much they could help with and felt the earnest gratitude of the recipients. A consultant in their midst, however, pointed out that they were reinforcing old patterns and urged them to think about what the recipients could offer them that was of comparable value, namely, something they didn't have at home and needed. There was silence. Finally, an educator in the donor group asked about the possibility of an immersion experience for teachers to visit for a month or two, to get to know the families, students, and community, and perhaps teach a little in their school, so that she could share from that experience in her own classroom back home. In a similar diocese, youth mission trips were set up, where the mission involved primarily learning and building friendships, and only secondarily helping and working together on projects. In this way, we become stewards of one another, each sharing our resources interdependently. Third, stewardship is about empowering one another so that each and every one has the possibility of flourishing. This is the heart of mutual mission. It is also where we as selves meet one another in mutual respect and gratitude. Self-interest and injustice, however, have increased at a rampant velocity around the world today. The widespread loss of common ground and the common good is disheartening and dangerous. In an Anglican communion program on interfaith relations last week, Sarojit Mondal from the Church of Bangladesh noted how religion, when politicized, becomes a tool for power and position. Although sociologist Max Weber saw the possibility of claiming religious authority to challenge unjust structures and regimes, he also saw its danger when to serve one's political self-interests and its ultimate incompatibility with a rational and orderly society. Using religion to promote injustice is also a corruption and betrayal of trust. Mondal did add a hopeful note that even in the context of Bangladesh, people are continuing to support each other across religions, and that young people are longing for an ethos of justice and mutual respect. Democracy, as we are seeing, is fragile. The very weakness of the Anglican Communion and other organizations held together by the will and commitment of its members is also its tremendous strength, but only so long as we are stewards of their survival. Sociologist Robert Bellah and later Robert Putnam were concerned with declining involvement in our civic and religious institutions as vessels of core values that transcend generations. Institutions can be corrupted, and they can fall. They also can be made right again where there is a collective will. To be good stewards, we need to be focused on what will spread God's goodness in the world, a focus that leads to the kind of justice that makes lasting peace possible. As stewards of institutions that value the integrity of human differences and where conflicts are catalysts for deeper understanding and seeking ways to walk together despite divisive external forces, we can build the foundation of a dynamic and morally just peace. Today is the International Day of Peace, begun by the United Nations for building a culture of peace. Let us be stewards of God's peace in how we use our resources, our talents, and our hearts. In our collect this morning, we heard, "Grant us not to be anxious about earthly things, but to hold fast to those that shall endure." This is our mantra for the struggle of our times. If we hold fast to what will endure, we can be free to live and act in the moment through our spiritual center of value. No one can serve two masters. What and how will you choose to serve?